The media cycle fixates on kinetic events. Initial reports citing combat activity claimed a Su-34 was shot down. This is the narrative you are meant to follow. It is a strategic misdirection. The mathematical certainty of asset attrition in conventional warfare is a solved problem. The real threat is not the missile you can see. It is the silence that follows an attack you cannot. The pivot to asymmetric warfare is not a theory. It is a protocol. The vector of attack is shifting from kinetic impact to systemic paralysis. Analysts at RUSI have confirmed the blueprint. Bypass the hardened target and neutralize the soft infrastructure that gives it power. Why shoot down one pilot when you can blind an entire fleet? This is the doctrine of the silent vector. Adversaries are no longer focused on destroying the warfighter. They are focused on severing the subsea fiber optic cables that carry the global economy. They are focused on blinding the satellite constellations that enable GPS, secure communications, and launch-on-warning capability. The objective is to create the blind Leviathan, a superpower armed with the most advanced kinetic tools in history, but rendered operationally inert, a military that cannot receive targeting data, a financial system that cannot clear a transaction, an energy grid that, as the Dragos report on the Polish attack confirms, is now a primary target. Power without sight is not power, it is liability. The war in Ukraine is not a territorial dispute. It is a solvency crisis. For Russia, every lost asset, like the Su-34 strike aircraft reported downed over the Black Sea, represents an unrecoverable kinetic cost. The mathematical certainty of this attrition creates an existential domestic liability. This is not sustainable. CSIS analysis confirms the conflict's declining popularity is a core political liability for Moscow. When a state's capacity to wage conventional war is exceeded by its rate of material and political capital burn, it faces a strategic choice: capitulation or escalation. The protocol dictates escalation, but on a different vector. This weakness forces a pivot. It is a launch-on-warning protocol for asymmetric warfare. Adversaries bypass direct kinetic engagement, which they are mathematically losing, to attack the systemic vulnerabilities of their opponent. The objective shifts from destroying tanks to triggering a solvency cascade in the West. The Dragos report of a cyber attack on the Polish electric grid is not a random act of malice, it is a live fire test. The motive is to establish a credible threat against the fragile architecture that underpins Western economies. It is a direct signal. Our battlefield losses are being converted into your systemic risk. Our solvency crisis will become yours. This is the economics of lethality. The Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, codifies the core equation. A $5 million main battle tank is now systemically vulnerable to a $500 FPV drone. This is not a linear evolution. It is a logarithmic collapse in the kinetic cost of destruction. The battlefield has become a zero-sum accounting ledger where multi-billion-dollar assets are being written off by commercially available hardware. This inversion of cost is the central mechanism driving the strategic pivot. This phenomenon is designated the democratization of violence. It signifies the terminal decline of the state monopoly on high-impact force projection. For generations, inflicting strategic damage required a nation-state's industrial base. Now, the ability to neutralize a power grid, a port, or a tank column is available at a cost equivalent to consumer electronics. This decentralizes lethality, making every node of our complex infrastructure a potential target for low-cost, high-impact asymmetric attacks. The attrition of high-value conventional assets, such as the reported downing of Russian Su-34 strike aircraft, serves as the primary accelerant for this pivot. Adversaries observe these kinetic losses and recalibrate. Why risk a $50 million jet when a cyber unit, like the Electrum Group targeting Polish energy infrastructure, can achieve greater systemic disruption with near-zero physical risk. The blueprint is clear. Bypass expensive force-on-force engagement and directly attack the fragile interconnected systems that underpin Western economic solvency. The high kinetic cost of conventional attrition, validated by each Su-34 lost over Ukraine, has triggered a predetermined protocol. Adversaries are pivoting from battlefield losses to a zero-sum economic conflict. This pivot requires a laboratory to test the payload before launch. This is not theoretical. According to industrial security firm Dragos, the cyber attack on the Polish electric system was a live-fire exercise. State-backed actors like the Electrum Group used it as a testbed to measure response times and probe vulnerabilities in Western-aligned energy infrastructure. Poland was the proving ground. These are the gray zones. Analysts at RUSI and CSIS identify nations with inherent systemic fragility as proxy laboratories. Escalating infrastructure failures in jurisdictions like South Africa, or warnings over grid vulnerabilities in Canada, are not simply domestic issues. They are staging areas to refine asymmetric tactics and stress test the supply chains of the West. The objective is to perfect the vector that bypasses kinetic engagement entirely. The goal is to connect a localized power outage in a proxy state to a systemic liquidity event in a primary target. A 157-year-old bank already warns the US dollar is overvalued. The chaos engineered in the gray zone is the blueprint for triggering a solvency crisis in the core. The launch-on-warning doctrine is not a strategy. It is a protocol of mutually assured destruction, refined to machine speed. The logic is zero-sum. If an adversary's nuclear strike is detected, you do not wait for impact. You launch your own retaliatory strike while your assets are still viable. Waiting for confirmation is strategically identical to surrender. However, conventional military attrition has accelerated the timeline. The loss of high-value kinetic assets, such as the Su-34 strike aircraft reported downed over Ukraine, has made the cost of direct warfare mathematically unsustainable for adversaries. This forces a mandatory pivot away from kinetic engagement. The pivot is to asymmetric warfare, targeting systemic liabilities. This is not a forecast. It is an observation. According to Dragos, the Electrum Group's cyber attack on the Polish electric system demonstrates the blueprint. Bypass military armor and attack civilian infrastructure directly. This is the new battle space. This creates the fog of digital war. According to CSIS threat models, the primary vector for nuclear escalation is no longer a missile, but a malicious data packet. If a cyber attack blinds an early warning radar network, the commander is trapped by his own protocol. Is it a system glitch, or is the lack of a signal the prelude to a decapitating first strike? He has minutes to decide. The doctrine forces a choice. Launch on a potential false alarm and initiate global thermonuclear war, or hesitate and risk total annihilation. The adversary does not need to defeat the missile shield. They only need to make the commander believe it has failed. The fear of being blinded becomes the trigger. This is how economic weakness, reflected in warnings of an overvalued dollar, accelerates a conflict that begins not on a battlefield, but inside a server. The mathematical certainty of kinetic attrition, evidenced by the steady liquidation of assets like the Su-34, has forced a protocol shift. The strategic pivot from conventional warfare to asymmetric attack is not a theory. It is an active campaign. Analysts at CSIS and Dragos confirm the blueprint, bypassing military targets to directly engage core systemic liabilities. The 2023 cyber attack on Poland's distributed energy resources was not a random event. It was a field test. The vector is now proven. This vector's primary target is the West's financial architecture, which senior banking authorities now warn is built upon an overvalued dollar. Economic fragility is the new front line. A solvency crisis is the ultimate force multiplier. The calibration forecast for the next 12 months is therefore a liquidity event, disguised as a logistics failure. Expect a 72-hour, attribution impossible blackout at a Tier 1 U.S. port's central data processing and container management system. Think Los Angeles or Houston. The event will be framed as a cascading system malfunction. The objective is not physical destruction, but to demonstrate control over the choke points of global trade and liquidity. It is a launch-on warning signal aimed at the solvency of the Western financial system.